Hey friends, welcome back to the cabin. Well, today I'm going to show you how to make sauerkraut. So let me gather up my supplies and I'll meet you back here in just a second and we'll get started. Recently, I was asked to do a video on how I make my sauerkraut, and it is such a simple process and it is a great introduction to fermenting foods. So I'm going to show you how I do it right now. Now this cabbage here was about 3.5 pounds. For 5 pounds you want 3 tablespoons of either canning salt or Himalayan pink salt or some type of salt like that, but you want to avoid table salt because it has additives in it that prevent caking that you want to stay away from. So canning salt, Himalayan salt, sea salt, something like that. So this was a 3.5 pound cabbage, so I'm going to use about 1.5 tablespoons. Doesn't have to be exact. Now this cabbage had a bad spot on it, so I lost a little bit of it here. But what you're going to do, first you're going to pull off some nice pretty outer leaves, a couple of them, and set them off to the side. Then you're going to quarter your cabbage and you're going to core it, and then you're going to slice it however you like it. I'm going to slice it into thin slices. You can put it into a food processor and chop it up if you prefer, however you want to do it. But if you slice it, go as thin as possible on that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get this sliced up like I like it, and I'll be right back with you and we'll go over the next steps. Now, one thing I did want to remind you of is you want to, before you slice it, is to rinse the cabbage really well and then let it drain. Okay, so we've got it sliced up really nice. I've got about 1.5 tablespoons of Himalayan pink salt here. So what I'm going to do now, if you don't have a crock, you can use a stainless steel pot, a large bowl, anything that you've got. I am going to pound it with this. This is actually a rolling pin that my daddy made for me, but it's a replica of the one that my grandmother had, and I think she knew something maybe that I didn't know back in those days, because she wanted it flat on one end, and it makes a great pounder for sauerkraut, so multi-purpose. But so what we're going to do is we're going to put it in this crock. Like I said, you can use a bowl, an enamelware pot, a stainless steel pot, whatever that you've got, because I'm going to transfer it from this crock to a 1/2 gallon mason jar. So that's another thing that you'll want to have. Or if you've got a gallon pickle jar, well, actually, this is not going to fill up a gallon one. If you've got one of the 1/2 gallon pickle jars, you could use that, or I've just got one of the ball mason jars. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put it in here, and I will sprinkle a little bit of salt as I go along. We're going to mix the salt before we start pounding it. We're going to do this with good clean hands always. And you just take your sliced cabbage, you're going to mix it up a little bit, break it up. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit more of my salt. But what I'm going to do now is actually take my pounder. And what we're doing when we pound it is we are actually squeezing the juices out of it. Now, let me, a little tidbit that I want to share with you is a fresh homegrown cabbage that you just picked maybe like this morning. It's going to have a lot more moisture in it. It's going to have a lot more juice. It'll produce a lot more juice when you do this than one that maybe you bought at the store. The one at the store will have been picked, boxed and shipped and sat in the store for several days possibly. So it's going to dehydrate a little bit as each day goes by, so you won't get quite as much of the liquid that you would from a fresh homegrown cabbage. All right, so we're just going to pound like this, and this is why I like the crock, because if you try to pound in a bowl, a lot of times when you get on the edges, the bowl's going to rock and you can spill your cabbage out, or it's just not quite as easy to do. So I love the crock for this. Okay, so I'm just going to keep pounding this, and I'll show you what we've got here in the next few minutes, kind of show you what you want to look for. I'm going to pound it, I'm going to stir it, and then I'm going to pound it some more, and then I'll show you what we've got, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, so I wanted to show you, there's a little bit of the juices that we've worked out, but this was a store-bought cabbage, so I may have to help it out a little bit. We'll know when we put it in the mason jar in just a second. Okay, so I've got the outer leaves. I'm going to fold them. And put them down in here. I'm going to kind of put them where the concave goes down on this first one, because we want to hold it down and make sure there's not any air in there underneath it. Same as with this one. All right, so I'll push it down. Look at that. Okay, so what I did is I made sure that I got those cabbage leaves where they are below the brine. I put my jelly jar in there, and I actually filled it with water that will hold everything down nice and below the brine. And I'm going to actually put the two-piece lid on, but I'm not going to screw it down very, very tight at all. Okay, so I'm going to put this on. Just barely screw it down. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to set this in a bowl or something so that if it did bubble up and come out, which I don't think it is because it's sitting here so far below, but if I'd had it up here where I normally like to have it to make sauerkraut, over the course of the fermentation for the first 2 or 3 days, you will want to burp it. Just release this, release a little bit of air, but it's still going to bubble out and it can make a mess, so you want it to be sitting in something that will catch the liquid. All of that is normal. After about 4 or 5 days, depending on the warmth of your kitchen. My kitchen is pretty warm. It's summertime here right now, and the sauerkraut sits closer to the stove, and it will ferment pretty fast. Now, the wintertime, it may take it 10 to 12 days or something like that. But now, after about 4 days on my last batch, it was almost perfect. I left it about 3 more days. You can taste it. And when it gets to the tartness that you like, then you can stop the process by taking your weight out, putting a different lid on, because the salt will corrode these lids, putting a different lid on and setting it in the refrigerator. And then you're good to go. You've got sauerkraut. Okay, so a while ago I noticed that there's a few specks of cabbage stuck to the side of the jar on the inside above the brine. So I'm going to take my weight out. I'm going to wipe all that down and make sure there's no cabbage above the brine, because that can mold and we don't want that. So I'll make sure that's good and clean, put my weight back in, and set this off where it'll be warm and it can just bubble away and ferment and turn into wonderful sauerkraut. Now, my friend Mary at Mary's Nest, she has a great video on making canned sauerkraut, and she does it a little bit different. She adds a little twist to it, and I'll link to that video up here. You might want to go watch that one and try out how she does it. And if you want to can sauerkraut and not go through the fermentation process, my friend Lori at Whippoorwill Holler, she actually cans the cabbage with vinegar to make her sauerkraut, and I'll link to that video up here. So that's some alternatives that you can look at, and I think you'll enjoy both of those. But I want to leave you with these beautiful words. Don't ever forget that your Heavenly Father loves you. And I'll see you on the next video. God bless.